Thank you for being so welcoming. It's so nice to see gestures of friendship across cities. I feel like we need more friendship and respect and mutual curiosity today more than ever, in case anyone's been watching the news of what's happening at the moment. Today is an intense day for international relations, so a good day for international friendship. Two, on that somber note, we're going to leaven the environment with our next session, which is a panel called From Pledges to Practice, Designing Policy for Climate Action. So this is the policy chat. It could be boring, but I've been assured from the people from behind the stage that they're going to actually provoke some controversy on the stage so that we can all leave feeling riled up. So, who are we welcoming? We are welcoming our chair, Fiona Harvey, Lord Deben, and Angela Hultberg. So please join me in giving them a very warm welcome in anticipation of the controversy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. And here we are in the nearly final session of the Congress. I'm Fiona Harvey, Environment Editor of The Guardian, and I am going to be moderating this conversation, really, between our two fantastic panelists here. And we'll be talking about policy, because when you're talking about design, we all know that sustainability has to be built in from the start. But how do you get the impetus to do that? Really, designers need policy, the right policy framework that will encourage, or in some cases force, or mandate them to design in a certain way. Because if we don't do that, then we could end up with the kind of world that we already live in, where emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are still rising, and we need them to be falling sharply. So I've got Lord Deben with me today. He is the former chairman of the Climate Change Committee and has had a long and distinguished career in politics and policy, and also in business. So he's got a variety of perspectives there, which I think will come in very handy. We've also got Angela Hultberg, who is Global Sustainability Director at Kearney, the consultancy. So she has been thinking very deeply about how we do sustainability in design in all kinds of ways, from COP26, where she was an advisor, to her previous role in IKEA, and what she's doing now. So I'm going to start by asking, well, if design can really make such a difference to whether we actually solve the problems of the planet, how do we get the policy right to ensure that designers work within the right framework? I'll start with you, Lord Deben. What would you say?
Well, first of all, it must be true that the design is absolutely crucial to the end result. I mean, that must be true. It's also true that most people don't think of it like that. And I mean, I run a consultancy too, and in Sancroft we constantly begin with, why are we here? In other words, let's go back to where we started. So why does this thing look like this? Does it need to look like this? No, let's start by where it begins. And then secondly, what we need to do in making policy is something which is crucial, which is very simple, and that is that we want to know what is the outcome. In other words, you don't make sensible policy if you set down that you have to do this and you've got to do that and you've got to do that. That's not it at all. You have to say, for example, that all electric irons have got to be able to be repaired and must not be built so that they can't be repaired. I'm not going to tell you how to repair it, because, you know, I'm an ex-politician. Politicians have no idea how to make an electric iron. But they do know that we actually have to have a repairing culture. And that's what you have to say. you have to say that we've got to reduce our emissions by so much, and this particular industry, you can set a target for it. But the way you do it, it doesn't matter if you have a lot of ladies twiddling around on the tiptoes. If that makes it possible, then have that. But it's nothing to do with me how you achieve it. It's you. So you go back to the design the moment you do that, because every business knows very well that if they've got to meet that outcome, you have to start with the first step, which is the design.
Fantastic. When you talk about designing policy based on outcome, can you think of any examples where that hasn't happened?
Well, I mean, you can do it with most electrical goods, because what has happened with electrical goods is that we have set particular targets, but we have not set them in a form which means that they cover everything. So in order to achieve better water arrangements in one piece, it'll use more electricity, if you see what I mean. You've also got to be holistic about this. You mustn't create the circumstances in which your outcomes are too narrow. The outcomes have got to be pretty wide if you're going to cover everything. I'm rather pleased with an awful lot of the changes that have been made, except that we haven't been brave enough. It's bravery that's important. And I always remember a row with Dyson about his vacuum cleaners, because he objected to the fact that we said they had to be using less electricity and that vacuum cleaners should be less noisy. We didn't tell him how to do it. We merely said that that was sensible. It's like the lawnmowers. Somebody tried to have rules about how you made lawnmowers quieter. That's not sensible at all. You set the targets that lawnmowers, the sort you sit on, have got to have a noise level which is lower than this number of decibels. And the reason for that is because you're not going to get people to wear hearing things, so they better be protected from the fact that, and there's no reason why you can't have a quieter lawnmower. Lawnmower manufacturers were furious. I was the minister who had to vote for it. Indeed, I was told by the Treasury not to vote for it because the industry didn't want it. But I did want it, so I accidentally voted in the right way in the sensible days. Those, by the way, were in the sensible days when we were in the members of the European Union instead of the stupidity which we've managed to achieve in the meantime.
Angela, how do you see policy being designed? And I mean, as we've noted, politicians are not business people, they're not designers themselves.
Ain't that the truth?
If you were a politician, think yourself into the mind of a politician, what should they be doing? What should they be thinking?
Well, those are two different things sometimes, to put yourself in the mind of a politician and thinking what they should be doing. But no, I agree completely. You have to regulate based on the desired outcome, because technology will move much, much faster than politicians ever will. And like we heard, politicians are not the best at innovation or procurement or design or anything else. So it does not make sense. And we've seen many examples of where regulation actually drives more unsustainable products. We saw it with packaging when we all collectively lost our mind about single-use plastic, and we saw regulation happening rather quickly, actually, for once. But in a way that forced some of the packaging companies to actually put new solutions on the market with a higher carbon footprint. But it wasn't plastic, but it was actually a higher carbon footprint. So
you've got a perverse outcome there.
You know, because they regulated on the material, the technology, rather than desired outcome. So we've tried it, it doesn't work, don't do it. Let's designers design, let innovators innovate. And politicians can tell you what they need to achieve. So completely agree with that. One thing I'll add, though, is that it's not just the designers, right? Agreed. 80% of all sustainability is built in at the moment of design. They're the ones thinking, or should be thinking, what happens during the lifetime, what happens after life, etc., etc. But you can build or design the most sustainable product if it's not taken care of in the right way, if it's not used in the right way, it's not going to happen. This could be made of 100% recycled materials and it's 100% recyclable. But if the consumer doesn't recycle it, it's still waste. Yeah. If there's no infrastructure to recycle it, it's still waste. And if nobody's taking care of that recycled material and turning it into something else, it's still waste. And we're also seeing policy that, aims at doing something well. We want a better, more sustainable solution, but we penalize only one party in that whole ecosystem. It's happening with trucks and buses at the moment. We want electric truck and buses, fantastic, all aboard, love it. And so we put mandates on the producer of the vehicles. You have to produce and sell X% of electric vehicles. Fantastic. But I mean, Volvo, Daimler, Scania, Traton, they can all produce electric trucks until the end of time. If nobody buys them, it's not going to happen anyway. Why won't you buy an electric truck? Because there's no charging infrastructure. So, how do we work with all the parts of the ecosystem? But because the manufacturer is the only one who will pay the penalty, there's no incentive from utility companies, charging infrastructure companies, from consumers, anyone else. So unless you pair that regulation with the enablers you need to actually make it happen, what did we achieve? We got some fines out of truck manufacturers, and they'll have a shitty year or 10, but we didn't actually achieve anything. So a holistic view, when we talk about green transition or sustainable transformation, it's just that. It's transformation. You cannot become circular alone. You need the ecosystem. So that's also something that policymakers need to think about. It's not enough to single out one designer in one industry and say, you have to fix it. Have to fix everything around it as well.
I think that's a wonderful example. I chair the Organisation for Zero Transport, so I give you a single example of the nonsense. There's a bus company. It's got 5,000 buses. 4,000 of them are electric or hydrogen. There are 1,000 that are not. So I said to the chap who's running it, I said, why have you got 1,000 buses that are not? Oh, they said, because we do the, we run the buses in a major British port town. And we would like to have electric buses, but there's not enough electricity there for us to have electric buses. And so I have now been spending quite a long time trying to get the distribution operations to understand that this is a target. One of the problems we have, actually, to cover what you've just said, is that the energy companies, in general, don't understand that they've got customers. The energy companies think about distribution and generation, but they don't think. I asked very senior people in National Grid the other day, I said, what are you doing about ports? And they said, what do you mean doing about ports? I said, well, what is your plan for making sure there's enough electricity for ports? We don't do that. I said, you ought to do it. First of all, ports are usually at the end of lines. How do you mean? They said, well, I said, they happen to be on the sea, so it tends to be true that they're on the ends of lines. And therefore, you've got to think about them in that sense. And also, ports have a lot of boats coming in. The last thing you want is those boats running their diesel engines to keep the electricity going. You want to be able to plug them in. But you can't do that in the Port of London. You can't do that in the Port of Southampton. You can't even do it in the Port of Felixstowe, because there's not enough energy to be able to do that. And you've got to think about it in that term. So it's absolutely right that every part of the arrangement has got to have its proper targets. But I wonder whether there's one bit of design which we both missed out. It's designing the way that the human being deals with the product you've made. I mean, most of us have been to stay in a hotel room which has got an old-fashioned temperature thing on it, and we're always terrified of changing it because it's so complicated and you don't think you'll get it back, so you don't do it. you need to have simple systems. And I have to say, I've always been pleased when I was a minister having to deal with science, that I never did any science, so I could always ask the stupid questions, because I always found those were the most difficult ones. Very clever people are very often not able to answer the simplest questions. And I find this, one of the simple questions is just, how do I use this? I mean, all those wasted smart meters, which nobody knows how to use. I bet you that most of you know somebody, if it's not yourself, who isn't using the smart meter because it's never been explained how you do it, and the design is not necessarily user efficient. So I want to get designers particularly keen on thinking right to the end. Who is going to use this? How do I do it in a way that even John Deben can do it? That's all you have to do, and you do that and they'll all work.
It's very basic, isn't it? Because the most unsustainable product, as Kevin Nolan said yesterday from GE Home Appliances, is like, if you're focusing on a product that nobody wants, then you're in trouble. And that's the most unsustainable product of all, because it's just a waste of resources, waste of the energy, waste of the material, and it is in itself waste because consumers don't want to use it. And that's why you need to embed sustainability deep into the design principles, right along safety, quality, cost, right? I don't go into H&M, look at a sweater and think, is this safe? Is this sweater safe in H&M or Zara or Burberry or whatever? I just assume it is. I assume I can put this on without my skin falling off. Now, the same should be said for sustainability, right? We all know consumers aren't particularly interested in paying premium for it. They shouldn't have to. Being sustainable should not be, a question about how much money and if you can afford to be sustainable. It should just be that it's affordable and accessible.
This is a problem, because one of the reasons why we have unsustainable design in some cases is that it costs more. Not always, but quite often it can cost more to build in sustainability, to go for the most sustainable option. It's not always the cheapest option. So what do you do when cost is in conflict?
It depends, first of all, it depends on what we mean with cost, right? Whose cost? The manufacturer's cost? The consumer's cost? Society's cost? It's a very high cost to see plastic bottles all over the city.
But look, if I'm a designer and I'm designing something, what I'm caring about is the cost to the client and what they're going to say about, how much they're spending. So, I would love if everybody could think about the final cost to society and think of those wonderful,
but even to
terms.
consumers.
But the fact is that people who are sitting there doing this job day after day, they're under the cosh. And
of
they've
course,
got to
but
think
there
about
doesn't have to be a conflict. I absolutely reject the notion that there has to be a conflict between a good product at a good price and profit that is also good for the planet. We reduce material, good for cost, good for planet. We reduce energy consumption, we reduce water consumption, we reduce the use of fossil fuels. All of these things are good for bottom line as well as the planet. So there doesn't have to be a conflict. Some things are more expensive, and here we could use policy actually. We could use some policy to make green steel cheaper. Today, green steel is more expensive, no way around it. It's more expensive than conventional steel, and there is not a truck driver, if we go back to that example, in the world that's going to pay premium to have green steel, in his truck. So there we could actually need some policy to help us until volumes go up, prices go down. But if we find ourselves in a situation where there is a clear conflict, then we need to maybe have another look. We need to maybe think about doing it in a different way. If we do it the same way as always and we reach that conflict, we need to dig deeper. I'm not saying necessarily we're doing it wrong, but obviously, as designers, as innovators, there's always another way of doing things, and we should explore it and not accept the narrative that there has to be a conflict there.
But isn't that... isn't that one of the roles of politicians? Because the politician should know that doing things in a particular way may make the product cheaper for the customer, but there's a cost which the community as a whole is paying. And for me,
Politicians perhaps ought to know that. But, as you know, politicians come under the most immense pressure from businesses and lobbyists who, by and large, keep saying, we don't want regulation, we want looser regulation, we want to cut red tape. And that's why you have so many populist parties in so many countries around the world at the moment saying, deregulate, cut red tape, cut inefficiency, it'll be much better for people. Politicians hear that.
well, they hear that, but they don't hear the other side. Very large numbers of businesses are asking for proper regulation. The food industry is desperate for a food strategy which sets standards and which actually does do something about the appallingly bad food which is being eaten, which costs us through the National Health Service enormous amounts. So that if this government, like the previous one, has ignored this and now has baby foods, for example. We know that the present baby foods are loaded with sugar. 47% of baby foods have more sugar than they ought to have, and 27% have so much that if they were for more general use, they'd have to have a warning label on it. That's the truth. Now, what does the government do? It produces guidelines and says that the baby food manufacturers should meet these guidelines over the next 18 months. And if they don't, then the government may take further measures. Balls. What they should be doing... I beg your pardon. What they should be doing would be saying in 6 months your labelling has got to be truthful. We know you've got a bit of time to put it, 6 months. Within a year, your products have got to meet the standards which we set. That's what we should be doing. Now, that's true about sustainability much more generally. You mentioned a number of clothes manufacturers and sellers. You didn't mention Primark. Now, Primark has perhaps the... I mean, I'm biased because we work with Primark in Sancroft. And one has to say that... they are producing some of the cheapest things in the market, but they are very tough about longevity, that actually these are going to last just as long as rather more expensive things that you buy. They're very tough about the fact that they've got 200,000 small farmers learning to grow cotton more sustainably. All that is done by a company that is selling its products really at a very, very competitive price. So I quite agree with you. You've got to think these things through, and although governments have a role to set standards and to make it clear that when you buy something, you should pay the full cost. And I'm just going to say one naughty political thing. I believe that the real way in which we have been betrayed is that conservatives and people who believe in free enterprise have refused to make the changes they ought to make. Because if you believe in free enterprise, you think people ought to pay the full cost of what they buy. But we don't do that. We put a lot of that cost on the public. All of us have had cheap electricity, so that large piles of coal filth being piled up outside mines. We've all benefited from the fact that the community has had to pay for things which we ought to have paid for when we bought it. I think that's a deeply offensive thing in a capitalist society. And yet if you look at Mr. Trump, that's exactly what he's doing. Entirely unfree society, protecting people who are selling goods which are not paying the full social price, like the producers of coal, oil and gas, and stopping the people who are beginning to do the right thing, like photovoltaic cells and wind power. Exactly. It is a total betrayal of the free enterprise system, and we ought to fight it.
Agreed. if I may.
Yeah.
I think one thing too, when we say that companies are pushing back on regulation, some are fair, many aren't, like we said, but I mean, my job is to speak with businesses every day. What they want is not more or less. What they want is regulation they can trust for more than 4 years.
Yes, exactly.
If I am CEO of, thank you. If I'm the CEO of XYZ and I'm about to spend a few billions on energy transition or infrastructure or setting up my circular supply chain, I need to know that that €1 billion investment is worth something 4 years from now. Politicians are in the business of getting re-elected, and that is punishing businesses who would make the investments, who would secure future revenue streams and more modern technologies, but they don't dare because they don't know what the playing field looks like just a few years from now.
So political U-turns are really damaging. Are there any examples that you can think of where industry has worked really well with policymakers, where it has worked?
I think one interesting area on policy is actually in shipping, which we don't normally think about when things sustain. Shipping has managed to join forces because it's a great example of where politicians weren't doing enough. And so Maersk and the rest of the shipping community came together and said, look, within the role of IMO, what can we do together? Can we do this? And they started to co-create what they thought was ambitious but feasible together with regulators. I think it's one example, because also in shipping you can't have one government doing anything. So there really was a need, and you know, we're up at COP30. Obviously, we can't do international agreements.
It's quite unusual because it's got the International Maritime Organization, a global organization that they're all signed up to, which originally everyone had to sign up to for safety reasons. So,
but now they're using that as a vessel to actually drive sustainability because, you know, with the shippers themselves through IMO.
Do we need an IMO for every industry then?
We wouldn't have to, right? No. We have COP, we've been at it for 30 years, just like, you know, agree already. It's been 3 decades. Maybe we can agree that we should phase out or down or whatever word we want to use this year fossil fuels. It's not a lack of, you know, partnerships or organizations. The NGO community is full to the brim and more with organizations who, you know, bring in companies, bring in policymakers. That's not what we need. We need some guts. As we just heard, we need politicians put their foot down and actually say, this is something we want to achieve. Let's co-create with the industry who understands how these products work, and let's actually, you know, agree on something that will last so we can invest and start the transition. That's all we need. We just need some bravery.
Remember that there's a good lesson from the IMO, because the reason it's doing much of this is because various areas are saying we're not having boats in the Baltic, we're not having boats going through the Mediterranean, we're not having boats landing in this particular port or that, unless they do something about their emissions. So the IMO, which has a great problem because a number of its members don't have any seacoast, they have to have not a majority, they have to have a universality of votes. So they have to work very hard at it. But it seems to me that there are all sorts of coalitions of the willing, exactly what you say. But there are also people who are producing things which are damaging and which we are allowing it to happen.
We're even subsidizing it.
Even subsidizing. I mean, ExxonMobil has been lying about the effects of emissions for the last 40 years. We know that. We know that they knew what they were doing, and they told the world that they weren't, and they spent a huge amount of money protecting their deal. They've got to be told, and they have to pay for the fact that they are killing children in London because of what's coming out of the back of cars. Now, they have got to be part of the answer to that. Politicians have got to be tough enough to deal with them. But what are they doing? They're doing deals with ExxonMobil to extend this and push that and do the other, instead of standing up and saying, we're not prepared to have this any longer. you are causing this and you have to pay for it, you'd start to have a very much quicker move towards the sustainability if you actually paid the real cost. And that, just to leave this with you, the truth of the matter is that the cost of not being sustainable is much bigger than the cost of turning to become sustainable. It's much more expensive not to go for net zero, Mrs. Badenoch, much more expensive not to go for net zero than to go for it. And the trouble is, we are never prepared to tell the public what the cost of being what we are is and will be. We're always moaning on about the cost of transition. The real issue is how costly it is to go on destroying the planet. And that's what we have to fight.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's been fantastic, Lord Deben. Fantastic, Angela. One quick final question I'd just like to ask. We want to try and make sustainability easier for people. How would you make it easier?
It has to be cheaper and easier. And easy means getting into the minds of ordinary people instead of talking a language which they don't understand and don't want to understand. Make it easy by talking their language.
Thank you.
Agreed. Affordable, accessible. These are the two things. If the sustainable option is the superior option, we don't need to talk about sustainability ever again.
Brilliant. That would be a relief. Thank you. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed to both our panelists. You've both been fantastic. We could have had many more questions. We could have gone on all evening because there's so much to talk about in this issue. But you've had a fantastic conference. I hope that you all are able to go home and put into practice many of the ideas and the stimulating new directions that have come out of this Congress. We are nearly at the finish now, and I'll just say thank you very much on your behalf to our panelists. Thank you.